Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity Fundamentals, a joint presentation by Cyber Florida at the University of South Florida and the Florida Institute for Cybersecurity at the University of Florida for the employees of Alachua County. Please welcome today's speakers, Dr. Ron Sanders, Staff Director for Cyber Florida, and Dr. Daniela Oliveira, Associate Professor and IoT Term Professor at the University of Florida. Dr. Sanders, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. And for everybody's edification, that was Kate Whitaker, Cyber Florida's Director of Communications and Outreach. And you may hear her disembodied voice from time to time. Don't be scared. She's a really nice person. So let me briefly introduce myself and Professor Oliveira. Professor Oliveira, of course, is from the University of Florida. Go Gators, I guess. She is a professor of the Internet of Things. I think it's the Internet of Everything these days. She's an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at UF. She received her BS and MS degrees in computer science from the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil, and then earned her PhD in computer science from the University of California at Davis. Her principal research interest, apropos of today's program, is on interdisciplinary computer security, where she employs successful ideas from various disciplines to make computer systems most secure. And I read here that among other disciplines, she's also been studying the neuropsychological aspects of computer security. That's a fancy way of saying that's why we're here today. So more on Professor Oliveira as we get to her part of the program. As Kate indicated, I'm Ron Sanders. I'm Staff Director for Cyber Florida. You're going to get a short commercial on Cyber Florida in a second. Let me just say that I've been Staff Director at Cyber Florida for a little over 6 weeks now. I came to that position from running the School of Public Affairs at USF, but most of my life was spent in the federal government, mainly in the Defense Department and in the intelligence community, where I did things like worry about computer security, the recruiting and retention of cyber talent, and things like we're going to talk about today. That's why we're here. So without further ado, why don't we go in and get into our program? Let me give you a very brief overview. We're in the opening remarks stage, and I'm going to give you a bit of the backstory, and then we're going to move to the main event, which is Daniela Oliveira to talk about spear phishing fundamentals. You'll know why we're emphasizing that here in a moment. She'll finish. When she's finished, I'm going to share a number of case studies with you. I'll do that at the beginning more generally, but when we get to the near the end of the program, we're going to talk about some of your peers in other Florida jurisdictions, cities and counties, that have been victimized by something called spear phishing. A little bit more about that in a minute. We're going to talk about cybersecure culture, some final thoughts, and then closing remarks. So again, we're with each other for about 90 minutes today. There will be opportunities for questions. I would encourage you to use the questions tab on the software. Just type it in, and Kate's going to read it and send it to me, or I may even ask her to read it herself. That's why, again, you may hear that disembodied voice. So next slide, please, Kate. So here's why we're here. There are two ways for computer hackers to get into our systems and steal things. One is technical. We can have hackers who know their ones and zeros actually plant a computer virus, plant malware, penetrate a system. That takes a computer genius. It's hard. There's a much easier way, and you're it. The easiest way is for those computer hackers to get you to let them in, basically through social engineering, which is a fancy term for gullibility versus common sense. Our hosts today tell us the story of a mock spear phishing attack on employees in Alachua County, where the vast majority, it could even have been all of you, clicked on that mock spear phishing attack. Fortunately, it was mock, wasn't real. And a number of you even provided some of your credentials and personally identifiable information to the originator of that mock spear phishing attack. All of those are bad things. If that had been a real attack, you would have let them in the system. And in a couple of cases, you would have actually given them stuff about yourself, including your credentials. So as I said, the hard way is for somebody to actually penetrate technical systems. And we all have ID departments these days, and there are sophisticated cybersecurity packages that erect a pretty strong firewall between those systems and the outside world. So hackers have found it much easier to victimize you, to persuade you to let them in, and that's basically why we're here today. Next slide, please, Kate. So at the risk of stating the obvious, we're here to scare you straight, to get you to pay attention the next time you get a spear phishing email, whether it's mock or real. And one of the ways we'll scare you straight is by giving you a sense of the magnitude of the problem. Cybercrime, and I am talking about crime now, data theft, ransomware, things like that, as opposed to cyber espionage. I'll touch on that in a minute, but this isn't about cyber spies, it's about cyber criminals. And as you can see, cybercrime these days has a GDP greater than the country of Australia. That's a lot of money. It's a growing industry. I'll put industry in quotes, but certainly there are a lot of cyber criminals out there. You can see the tactics used in successful breaches, and you can see the breaches by source. Let me clue you in. We'll go back to that thing, statement I made at the outset. There are technical ways to get in and social engineering ways to get in. 80% of the breaches occur through the easy way, through social engineering, spear phishing, spoofing, basically persuading somebody who's gullible on the other end to do something dumb and then let them in. 80%. So if you're a hacker, if you're a cyber criminal, are you going to go the easy way or the hard way? And I'm here to tell you, these days, cybercrime has become like street crime. It doesn't take an evil computer genius to penetrate our systems. Well, it does if you're going to try to penetrate them in a technical way, but you can buy ransomware and malware tools on the dark web. That's a place where I hope none of us go, but you can buy those tools. So it doesn't take a genius to persuade somebody to open an attachment and let them in, and the rest is history. Next slide, please, Kate. You can see who the purveyors of this growing industry are, and they're familiar. All you got to do is look at the evening news. It's China, it's Russia, it's Iran, it's North Korea, it's Eastern Europe. A lot of this is state-sponsored. It's not Russia per se, but it's an Eastern European criminal syndicate. And as I said, even these days, it doesn't take an organized crime or a criminal syndicate to penetrate a system. It can take what amounts to a cyber version of a mugger to get you to let them in. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the, let me see if I can say that quickly, the Tampa teenage Twitter hacker. A 17-year-old who partnered with two other teenagers, one in Orlando and one in the United Kingdom. By all accounts, they'd never even met the young man in the United Kingdom. But they persuaded somebody in Twitter to let them in, a classic sort of social engineering spear phishing attack, so that the Twitter customer service rep, trying to be nice, let them in. Once they're in, they took the identity of famous people like Barack Obama and Kanye West. But here's the, so while the Twitter person who let them in was gullible, just think about what happened next. They sent emails to people in the name of those famous individuals and said, if you send me $1,000, I'll send you 2,000 back. And do you know that they got $100,000 worth of people contributing to that, expecting to double their money? So that's gullibility times 2. That's how they get in. In this case, it was homegrown cyber criminals of a relatively young age, but you can see from the slide, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And the United States is one of the, if not the biggest target, given the size of our economy. Next slide, please, Kate. So here's what you all need to start thinking about. Just as you're trained in ethics, in customer service, in equal employment opportunity, There are lots of things that every government employee, every city and county employee is trained on every year. You got to start thinking about cybersecurity as one of those things. And you can see some of the glossary of terms that you need to start thinking about and knowing about. I especially like the one dumpster diving. If anyone wants to venture a guess, dumpster diving means going out to the garbage can right outside your county offices and looking for things that carry somebody's PII, that is your social security number, bank account number, or something like that, or your access credentials, like a password. Phishing is on there. Daniela will talk much more about that. Malware, zombie drones, DOS and DDoS. That's a fancy way of saying the hackers trying to flood your system so you can't operate. These are all glossary. This is the glossary of terms that you need to start internalizing because it's coming soon to a theater near you. Next slide, please, Kate. And it's not just the folks in your network operations center or your IT department that have to worry about this. These are some very famous hacks, including a couple in government, and you've probably read about them in the news. Home Depot was hacked. They stole millions of credit card numbers. They got in through an air conditioning contractor. There are a couple of Florida governments that succumbed to a very similar attack. I used to work for something called the Office of Personnel Management. That's the OPM on your screen. And we had one of our employees click on an innocuous looking email, and guess what? 2.5 million security clearance records, including my own, are now in the hands of the People's Republic of China. And of course, we all know about Edward Snowden. Hackers are there to steal intellectual property. If you ever wondered why China's version of the F-35 fighter plane looks a lot like the F-35 fighter plane, it's because they stole the plans. And where it took us 10 years to develop that technology, they got it in an instant just by stealing it. Physical security is another way of getting in. Yankee Buckshot is the code name that the Department of Defense gave one of the most notorious cyber incidents. But you know what happened? A hacker took a bunch of infected thumb drives, threw them on the ground in the parking lot of a DoD installation. It happened to be one here in Florida. Lots of those employees picked up those infected thumb drives, and what do you think they did with them? They promptly went and plugged them into their computers, and guess what? We're now in. The hackers are in. In this case, it was a foreign government trying to steal secrets, but it could easily be somebody trying to hack a local government or a commercial company. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the last item on this slide, and that's ransomware. Probably the most expensive and most notorious example of ransomware is the city of Atlanta, where hackers went in, got in, shut most of the city down, and the city had to pay ransom to get their systems restarted. No one still knows how much ransom Atlanta paid. It may be as much as $40 million, but they ain't talking. Lake City is a city here in Florida, and after Daniela's done, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it and other peer cities and counties in this state that have been victimized by the very things that Daniela is going to talk about. Next slide, please, Kate. So you can see this slide. We'll make them available to you. More examples of the fact that it's a growing industry. Next slide, please, Kate. And guess what? One of the top 5 most attacked industries is government. Anybody want to guess why? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Next slide, please. There are some unique issues associated with local government, especially local government here in Florida. First of all, local governments have tons of PII. You collect things with people's social security numbers on it. People pay their bills, their water bills, their electric bills, their tax bills, you name it, bills. It's got a social security number, it's got a bank account number, it's got a routing number, it's got a credit card number. So local governments are a treasure trove of what's called PII. The same with commercially identifiable information. Businesses seeking permits. If people want to get in through a business, and again, I'm going to share some examples with you later in the program, the easiest way is to find the credentials, for example, their accounts receivable number from a county, and get in that way. Probably the most important one, and I have it highlighted here on the slide, especially when it comes to ransomware, is that government has uninterruptible services. You can't shut it down. You can shut down a shoe factory or a candy factory, and that the owner of those factories has to decide whether they're going to pay ransomware. But frankly, we don't miss them. But if they shut down a city, you can bet that the citizens of that city, or if they shut down a county, you can bet that the citizens of that county will notice. So it's that uninterruptible aspect that makes local governments especially vulnerable and juicy targets for hackers. And in Florida, we have our public records laws. A number of you sent in questions in advance asking about that. And unfortunately, it is true that if somebody sends you a public records request as an attachment, the favorite attack vector of hackers, you got to click on it. You're duty bound by law to respond to a public records request. And if you're not careful, if your county or city isn't careful, that's the easy way in. Next slide, please, Kate. So I apologize for the eye chart. Again, we'll make these available to you, but this looks complicated. It really isn't. Hackers look at your attack surface. They look at Alachua County's attack surface. Basically, any place where the county and its systems connect to the wild, to the internet. And guess what the most prominent part of that attack surface is? It's you. Because you connect the internet to the county's data, its networks, its systems. You're the easy way in. So while there are lots of other ways in, the IT department's got a handle on those other ways. But if you let them in, there's no way to prevent it. So this program is all about how to prevent them from getting in through you. Next slide, please, Kate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Oliveira, and she's going to talk to you about spear phishing fundamentals. Daniela, over to you, please.
Okay, so can you guys hear me? Can you hear me, Ron? Okay.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, so let me show my screen. And okay, Ron, can you see my screen okay?
I can see you just fine and hear you loud and clear. So
okay.
let's hope our audience can.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about phishing campaigns and aspects of human susceptibility. And this is a joint talk with Ali Berstein from the Google Anti-Abuse team. Like, unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but I will do my best to convey all the information and the insights about phishing campaigns. So let's start discussing social engineering, which is a concept that's very relevant for phishing. Social engineering is as old as time. It's the ability to influence someone into performing an action. And we are social engineered more often than we think. As you guys here in the webinar with kids at home know, we are social engineered by them almost every day. The problem is when we are influenced via deceptive arguments and the actions go against our best interests and benefits the adversary. And one type of social engineering happening online, and that involves direct messages to people, is phishing. So what is phishing? In the context of this talk, phishing are malicious emails, messages that usually have a link embedded that directs the victim into a malicious web page that attempts to steal users' credentials. But phishing can also involve messages where you have a link, and when the user clicks on the link, malware, malicious software like ransomware Ron was talking about, gets installed into the computer. But for the purpose of this talk, when you're looking at phishing campaigns at Gmail, which is a popular email provider, we're talking about emails that direct the user into a malicious web page. So to put things into context, Gmail blocks every day over 100 million phishing emails. And phishing is one of the major vectors used by attackers to compromise email accounts, for example, Google accounts, Gmail accounts. Just to give you an example, Google's recent research on the source of account compromise shows that phished users are 463 times more likely to get their accounts compromised than the average user. To put things into perspective, users compromised by malware, malicious software like ransomware, are 39 times more likely to have their account compromised than the average users. And users victims of prior breaches, like Ron also talked about the breaches, are 11 times more likely to have their accounts compromised than the average user. So this shows how dangerous phishing is and why it is critical to better understand this type of attack, why we're susceptible, and how can we protect users better. It's also important to distinguish the different types of phishing as a function of the volume of messages distributed and the sophistication of the attack in terms of the targeting, who they target. So let's start with spear phishing. So spear phishing, it's usually low volume. We call targeting, usually targeting one individual, a few individuals, and has high level of sophistication in terms of how appealing and how convincing the message is, because the attacker usually perform intelligence gathering on the victim. So remember John Podesta, so the infamous email that he was victim during the presidential campaign of 2016. So that's the classical example of spear phishing. The other type is boutique phishing. Boutique phishing is something in the middle, like it's something has intermediate volume, intermediate sophistication. So for example, it could be handcraft campaigns targeting a specific organization like an university or a particular government agency. And finally, we have bulk phishing, and bulk phishing is that has very low level of sophistication and high volume. Is that the type of email that's trying to phish anybody, whoever, like it has very little targeting and sophistication. So what makes phishing an effective attack vector that's very hard to mitigate? Phishing is evolving. We're going to talk about that as a segment of this presentation. Also, phishing is targeted and phishing is well crafted. So let's talk about that. So first, phishing is evolving, is an ever-moving target. So let me give you an example, an analogy. Let's consider cats. Cats will always be cats. So if you can get a picture of a cat at 2000 BC, a cat at 1200 AC, a cat today, you're going to see that the cat didn't change much. However, phishing pages and the content of the emails and the context and the subject, it changed substantial over short periods of time. And this presents a lot of challenging to automatic detection using AI and machine learning, because the training models used become obsolete in a short period of time. For example, 68% of the phishing emails blocked by Gmail are different from day to day. Another challenge is that phishing campaigns are short-lived. For example, research by Google shows that for boutique campaigns, the intermediate type of phishing emails, usually a campaign takes about 7 months. But for the bulk campaigns, it's about 13 hours. So again, this presents challenging for automatic detection and training via AI. also, phishing detection is hard because the phishers quickly adapt their campaigns and keep the number of target users low. For example, right now, we have been hearing a lot of phishing campaigns using COVID as a topic. In 6 months, hopefully, if COVID becomes less of a catastrophe here in the world, maybe there's going to be another problem. Maybe it's going to be the election. Now that things are going to start to pick up, the election, the presidential election, is going to be something that's become a topic. So it varies according to what happens in the world and in the context of the users. So another challenge of phishing is that phishing is targeted. For example, a company is almost so this is all based on Google research, is almost 5 times more likely to be targeted than the average Gmail user. And as you can see, government related, it's also very, it's almost 3 times more likely to be targeted than end user. So what phishing pages impersonate? So email providers usually phishing impersonate Google, Outlook, Hotmail, 42%. They also try to impersonate cloud services, 25%, financial institutions, 13%, e-commerce, for example, Amazon, 5%, and delivery companies, almost 4%. And when I say impersonate, it's like we're talking about which pages that the user, which phishing pages and which topic it's going to see in the email. The email is impersonating an email from Amazon, for example. Detecting advanced phishing requires context that only the user has. For example, Gmail inbox has what's called soft warnings to help users decide which emails are phishing. And these are based on ground truth that Google has. For example, when Gmail sends a soft warning like that, be careful with this message, it's because Gmail already knows that the URL contained in this message and this particular sender, they are malicious. They show it's part of their block lists. So the challenge again is that zero-day phishing. So in this case, Google knows and Google is warning the users. But what about new phishing? What about phishing that changes? What about if the attacker changes the sending email? What if the attacker slightly change the content of the message or change the page, the domain? So this all adds complication to detection. Why users end up getting phished? I'm sorry. So first of all, 45% of internet users don't know what phishing is. So if you don't know, if you have a problem, we all know we have a bigger problem, right? And also phishing is successful because it tricks the way our brain makes decisions. And clicking on a link on an email involves a lot of decision making. So Ron was just discussing how, for example, when you guys receive a request for public records, you have to process this request by law, by your job. So you are making a decision about, should I risk not doing my job, or should I risk have my organization being attacked? So it's a lot of decision making that goes into that. And we are all susceptible to phishing because of that, especially with regard to deception detection. And psychology and neuroscience research have some insights about that. So that's what the beauty of cybersecurity, it's an interdisciplinary discipline. And we need to learn from other fields and incorporate the insights to other fields to try to solve these problems that are happening in the cyber world. Like what happens in the physical world also sometimes translates into the cyber. Our ability to detect deception is influenced by a lot of factors. For example, inter-individual differences in our cognitive status, our social emotional status, and also even neurobiology. And we're going to talk about this. For example, the first inter-individual difference has to do with the way we use our brain. Our brain uses a dual processing mode to make decisions. So let's understand why this happens. Our brain makes thousands of decisions per minute, and most of them are unconscious. We are not even aware that we are making some decisions. So given that, there should be ways to optimize this. Otherwise, we would be overloaded with cognitive, like what they call cognitive load. We couldn't live like that, right? So evolution conditioned our brain to operate in an optimized way, in a way that's dual, like we have what's called the system 1, that's fast, and the system 2 that's slow. Slow in the sense of more deliberative, more logical, requiring more cognition. So this dual mode of operation was described, like there are several research, but like Daniel Kahneman's, he was the main face of the dual processing mode in his seminal work on decision making, which led to his Nobel Prize in economics. So according to the theory of the dual processing mode, we have this system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the one that's fast. So system 1 will use shortcuts, heuristics to make decisions. And this mode of operation is the one that we use when, for example, we enter in our health. You go to the dentist and you decide which seat we're going to take in the waiting room, right? We do not put a lot of thought into that. We just go. So it's fast, it's emotional, it's intuitive, little effort for them. The other processing mode, it's what Kahneman's called the system 2. System 2 is slower, consumes more brain energy, is more deliberative, uses logic. So we use system 2 when we are deciding, for example, which house we're going to buy. So there's a lot, like it's a huge undertaking. So we don't take this decision very lightly. So we are definitely using system 2 in the situations. So most of the times, these two systems, they operate in harmony and they are very effective for us as human beings. But the problem is that because system 1 relies on shortcuts, sometimes it can make mistakes, not only shortcuts, but biases. And sometimes system 1 will make mistakes which contribute to our susceptibility to phishing. Because, for example, many of us were receiving so many emails every day. And in most of the times, probably, I don't know, but like most of the times, the emails are benign. We are doing our job. We are using emails to do our job. So we have what's called in psychology the truth bias, because we perceive so many, the base rate is that everything's benign. People are usually honest. We are going to operate according to this bias. And when you guys, for example, receive a request, a malicious request for public records, it's very hard to be suspicious, because in most of the case, people are honest and the requests are legitimate. The second type of individual difference relates to social emotional function. For example, it has to do with personality, emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about that. So one is emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is our ability to understand your own and others people's emotion. And research shows that people that are good at emotional intelligence, at reading other people's emotions and also our own, they're usually better at detecting deception in real life. Cognitive motivation. So this is what they call the individual's tendency and to engage and like to engage in cognitively complex tasks. And research also shows that people that with this higher need for cognition, they are usually better at detecting deception. And probably this has to do with this type of people engaging more into system 2, into making decisions. Another aspect is personality. So, for example, there are what they call the big 5, several personality traits. And some of them is called agreeableness. So people scoring low in agreeableness as a personality trait. For example, when we score low in agreeableness, it means that you are suspicious of other people in situations in general, you tend to detect deception better, which is intuitive. Also, individuals with high self-control, people that are not risk-taking, that are not impulsive, that are usually better at detecting deception. People that have a high degree of empathy in general for other people, research shows that are better at detecting deception. So these are all factors that you see that varies from person to person, and sometimes we can't control. Another interesting aspect is mood. So usually research shows that a negative mood usually increases our deception detection abilities, and a positive mood decreases. Wow. So I'm not saying that we should be on a negative mood, maybe on the opposite, like let's be on a watch out, because when you're in a good mood, our vigilance state decreases a little bit. Okay, in a positive mood, we tend to produce a more benign interpretation of social situations in general, and this reduces our level of suspiciousness. A negative mood in general makes people to trigger the system too. So I think the message here is that let's be on a watch out when you're particularly happy, in a good mood, because that's when we're more trusting, we are more susceptible to this type of attacks. Another interesting thing that research in psychology brings is related to neurobiology, hormones, for example. Hormones and they play a role in deception detection because they influence our decision making and especially our risk-taking behavior. For example, it shows that individuals with high level of steroid hormones, especially testosterone, they tend to take greater risks in general. So this could be good and bad. Like it's good because you, for example, shows that people that work on the stock market, they have this tendency of taking risk and they can make a lot of profit. But on the other hand, in the situation of being perhaps deceived by a great offer online or something, that could be a factor that make these people more susceptible because they are not afraid of taking risks. Another hormone that's called oxytocin, it's not a hormone, it's called a peptide, but doesn't matter for the effect of our discussion, sometimes called the social hormone, has been shown to reduce deception detection ability because it makes us more social, which of course lower our social vigilance. Another one that's shown by research that decreases our vigilance and our ability to detect deception is dopamine and serotonin, which are chemicals released by the brain to provide communications between neurons. They are usually released, for example, usually after exercise, they are released. Sometimes called a feeling good sensation. And usually research shows that higher increased levels of these chemicals, they are associated with more impulsive and risk behavior, which might lead us more susceptible to deception. However, on the other hand, the stress hormone, cortisol, that we release in situations novel that make us uncomfortable, it usually increases our level of vigilance and also engage us into the system too, like we become more suspicious, which facilitates deception detection. Again, nobody here is saying that, oh, it's a good idea to be on a bad mood and stress out. No way, that's very bad. But it's the other way, like when we are feeling good, when you're in a good mood, we should manually trigger our system too and say, oh, maybe I should be a little bit more vigilant because I'm in a situation that I'm more trusting and perhaps I'm more gullible, like Ron said. Okay, so the other reason that why phishing is such a successful attack is that it's because phishing is well crafted. Phishers, adversaries, they will add deceptive cues to make messages more appealing to their victims. And they do that, adversaries, they do that in real life. Like when, for example, if I'm lying, if somebody's lying to someone, research shows that's a lot of deceptive cues that are added in the message to influence. Even when I'm talking about social engineering is not always malicious. I mentioned that our kids, they social engineer us all the time. So they will also add these deceptive, or in this case, influence cues to make their message more appealing. Or mom, just want a little bit of more ice cream because I'm so, I'm in this COVID, I'm not seeing my friends. I'm so sad, so let me have a little bit of more ice cream, or let me make a cake today. My daughter is using these ones with me. I'm sure she's not malicious, but she's sure adding these cues to make her message more appealing to me. And there are a few types of deceptive cues that I found in the research and the psychology literature that I found it's very relevant for phishing. One is persuasion. We're going to talk about all of them. The other one is gain and loss framing of the message, and the other one is the emotional salience or valence of the message, to add emotion to the message. So let's talk about persuasion. Messages are crafted in a way to persuade us to act on that. Okay, so ads, for example, ads all the time, they use persuasion tactics to make the products more appealing to us. So this is very common, and this is from the marketing literature. And there are 6 well-known principles of persuasion: authority, scarcity, reciprocation, social proof, commitment, and liking. I'm going to talk a few of them. For example, authority. People tend to comply with requests made by figures of authority in general. In the case of phishing, of course, the figures of authority is not somebody in a police uniform, but it's text, like it says, oh, this message comes from an IT department or from HR department, or it's coming from any figure of authority that you can imagine, or someone that has a high reputation that you feel bad saying no to. For example, a company, a bank, a university, a big university like the University of Florida, let's say a request coming from someone with a high position at the University of Florida. Scarcity. Opportunities seem more valuable to us in general when their availability is limited. For example, in the case of phishing, scarcity can be applied, for example, a coupon that's a fake coupon that's going to expire in 2 days, or a link to a discount. So it's all things that trigger people, that make us see the message as more appealing. Reciprocation, this one is interesting. I'm not sure if this is very related to phishing, but it's part of the persuasion strategies, and I think everybody can relate to, is that when someone gives you a gift or do you a favor, you feel in debt. You can't help but feeling that you need to reciprocate. But in phishing, for example, it's not very common, but could be presented like, for example, a user receiving a fake gift card and then being asked to fill a malicious survey on customer satisfaction. So, for example, this is an email, a real Gmail phishing that's using authority here, where the figure of authority is the CEO of construction, ABC. So you see CEO, we automatically think that's someone important, someone that you feel strange about saying no to. The other type of deceptive cue or influence cue is framing. Framing a message as potentially gain or potentially loss can also decrease our deception detection abilities. For example, a message implying an immediate sense of change in the status quo will be more appealing to people, will catch someone else's attention. For example, if you act on the message, you can potentially gain something like a free gift card, a discount. Or if you don't act on the message, you can potentially lose something like a refund, your email account, or you can, for example, not fulfill the request of a legitimate person asking for a public records request. So this is potentially a loss. In this example here, again, a real phishing email, and you see that's phishing not only because it says Amazon, hello Amazon, the user is being tricked to be concerned about possibly losing a refund. So another, a third deceptive cue that I brought here today is emotion. So in social engineering, even if it's not malicious, emotion is something that the social engineer will bring to the message to increase the appeal. Right? I always like to give the example of my daughter. Like, she's a social engineer. She usually use emotion. Please, mom. Please, mom. So we do this. It's part of us as being human beings, even when we're not being malicious. So emotion means positive or negative stimuli. That could be something that triggers a positive emotion, like, for example, joy, hope, or something that triggers a negative emotion, like anger, frustration, indignation. And it's usually either one, and positive and negative. It's associated with our reduced deception detection abilities. The emotional cues in the message, they may impair our ability to focus on the content of the message and the cues, the other, and realize and perceive other cues to deception. And this emotional arousal conveyed by the message may also confuse us on, okay, should I use system one? Should I use system two? Should I try to bring more logic here? In a way, I am seeing this message trying to bring these emotions to me. And again, this example here for a Gmail phishing, the phisher is tricking the user into feeling strong emotions about people affected by the California wildfire tragedy. Other challenges on phishing, on mitigating and addressing phishing, is that we cannot completely eliminate deception offline and online. Like, there is no way to do that. Deception is part of our making as human beings. Since human beings are human beings deceive one another, and there is no way to eliminate this from us. So this adds a challenge to eliminate. Phishing is deception in the cyber world. So if you cannot eliminate deception in the physical world, in our 4,000 years as human beings, how can you hope to eliminate deception in the cyber world? The other challenge is that anti-phishing technology interfacing the humans sometimes try, for example, warnings, training, sometimes they try to change the human. Into one example could be trying to overload us with so many guidelines and information, as if we can apply a lot of cognitive thought to every single messages that we receive. So we will not change that fast. So the message here is that more for us, me as a researcher, and for example, my colleague at Gmail, like, when we create interventions, we should consider that we should not try to change the human. And also, we as researchers and developers of technology, we should recognize that this approach, even training, when you train people, like, and this could be valuable for you when you're training your staff, that one size does not fit all. Like, I discussed how susceptibility changes based on a lot of individual factors, for example, and there are several other factors that I didn't bring, but like it relates to education. The more education, the usually research shows the less susceptibility. The older we get, our cognitive abilities tend to decline and become more trusting, so we should take this into consideration. It varies per culture, it varies by our personality, so there's a lot of things that that change our susceptibility that we need to consider when training, for example, training people against phishing. The analogy is, for example, the way we warn our 8-year-old kids against, for example, the dangers of the world is completely different from the way we warn a teenager. against it. If we use the same language with an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old, it will backfire. One of those, right? One will be too very sophisticated for an 8-year-old, and if you try to use 8-year-old language for the 15-year-old, the 15-year-old will just laugh at us. So it will not go well. However, there is light in the end of the tunnel. Phishing is preventable. There's a lot that we can do to alleviate this threat. There are several in-depth defenses that I'm briefly discuss. One of them that you guys, if you use Gmail, you probably see the use of two-factor authentication, right? If you're trying to authenticate, you need to have another way of authenticating yourself. Maybe you receive a code in your cell phone, and then you provide the code as another way to authenticate. So this two-factor authentication research shows that it's very, very, very effective to prevent accounts from being compromised. For example, even if you are victim of a phishing attack that steal your password, the adversary may have difficulty logging in because he or she not only needs the password, but he or she will also need, for example, your phone. So this will add a barrier. Another is education. Of course, as we saw, training should be targeted, should be relevant to the reality of the community. For example, training staff at Alachua County, it's a different reality than training, for example, people in another type of sector. Because, for example, Ron already discussed some of the issues you guys face. For example, you guys have to process requests from the community for public records. It's the classic example, right? That you need by law, for the Sunshine Law, you need to. So how can you gauge this? You need to do your job, but you need to make sure that you are not being attacked. So maybe the way that this sector needs to be trained is different from another sector needs to be trained. For example, a company like Google, for example, needs to be trained in anti-phishing behavior. The other detection, so this is something that, of course, companies like Google, Microsoft, they do as email providers. They try to filter as much as possible phishing. This is usually based on ground truth. It's not detection alone does not solve the problem, because as we discussed, phishing changes every day. But of course, they filter a huge amount of malicious messages. So that's another way that's used. And warnings. And warnings are very important. If your Gmail provider, your browser provides warnings, it's very important to heed to the warnings, because there is a reason why they are there. So I mentioned about two-factor authentication. There was a very interesting paper from the Google team that shows the effectiveness of two-factor authentication in preventing account takeovers. So they study, for example, having a secondary email, having an SMS verification, the ones by phone, or having a device prompt in your cell phone, or having a security key. So security key is not completely common, but it's shown that it's in all the cases that they study, having a security key for protecting email was effective in 100% of the cases. So that's something that we probably should consider as users, maybe making this more user-friendly. So takeaways: phishing is hard to detect because it evolves quickly. So it's not like you train a machine learning model like, oh, this is a cat, so if I show you a dog, you know that's not a cat. No, it's not like that, because the phishing changes every day. So right now, phishing is about COVID, and probably a few weeks from now, phishing is going to be about elections and COVID, and whatever happens in the reality of the community or the world. Deception detection abilities are affected by several factors that vary according to the individual. cognition, emotion, even neurobiology, your mood, your personality, your gender, your age, your education, your culture. Phishers, attackers, they are expert in influence, so they are going to be very good at placing deceptive cues in the message to make the message very convincing, very appealing. Another thing is the fact that unfortunately 45% of Gmail users, like this was a study by Gmail, but Gmail many has millions of users, don't know what phishing is. Education is, even though phishing is very challenging, we will not see it as a solved problem anytime soon, or probably ever, because deception is not a problem that's solved in the world. But education and awareness are key. And two-factor to protect the security of organizations, using some level of two-factor authentication helps tremendously in mitigating phishing and preventing adversaries from installing malware or taking hold of the servers and the infrastructure of the corporation. And phishing is preventable, again, with two-factor authentication. Again, it's a challenging problem, it's a challenging type of attack because it's so simple in one hand and so challenging on the other hand, but together we can stop, I wouldn't say stop, I think I would say mitigate phishing by getting us users, especially corporate users, to use more two-factor authentication and educating ourselves in a more targeted and relevant way about phishing tactics and phishing tactics. Thank you very much. That's what I had for today.
Thanks very much, Daniela. Kate, do we have any questions from the folks viewing the program?
We do. We have one question that was submitted that's an interesting topic. So obviously we know not to click on exe files, those executable files that'll immediately make changes to your computer. But we're wondering, what are some other file types to be wary of when you're dealing with email attachments?
Okay, so unfortunately, Office files like Excel, PowerPoint, Word, they are now, research shows that are now very targeted at distribution of malware, especially because in a corporate environment, we are exchanging these files all the time. Like it's very common. Even for myself, I exchange Word documents, Excel files with my colleagues, my collaborators, for example, with people in the administration at UF. So it's not, of course, Excel files like should raise all the red flags, but don't think that non-executable files, they will be safe. So especially Office files, they are on target.
Daniela, I have a question too that has been sent in. This is pretty simple, but I'd love your perspective on it. Why aren't these hackers caught and prosecuted?
The problem is attribution, right? They can come from different countries. They might act in a distributed fashion. For example, they can gather a several number of computers all over the world, compromise. Even could be for example, my computer might be compromised to send spam or phishing to other people, and I don't even know about it. So attribution, right, in cybersecurity, even in legal, we'd call this attribution. It's a very challenging problem just to actually find out who. It's going to be usually some criminal organization. Right now is not the lone hacker, except the Tampa case that was the Twitter case that was very, very interesting case. But usually these are criminal organizations that they act in a very organized way, and they're highly organized in the sense that they're not going to use one computer or one set of computers in one sub-network. They are going to probably compromise a whole lot of computers, let's say computers in Hawaii, computers in Germany, computers in all over the country, which makes it very, very hard to find them and prosecute. And even if you find them, if they are in another country, so this adds another layer of complications about, okay, how can you prosecute somebody from using the laws of the United States, laws and statutes of the United States, somebody that doesn't live here or is not a resident of the United States. So that's a whole
and the other thing that's complicated, of course, is the use of Bitcoin, right? You can't follow the money if the money is largely untraceable. And that's
That's absolutely, yes.
Any other questions, Kate, for Professor Oliveira? Why don't we, Daniela, if you don't mind staying with us for a little while, I know you've got a 3:30 call, so if you have to leave early, that would be fine. But why don't we go into the last segment on, I want to share some case studies with the audience and some final thoughts, but you should feel free to interject as we go through as well.
Okay.
So Kate, next slide, please. So on the right-hand side, you see the 5 Ds of cybersecurity, of a breach. These are the various forms of attack. Data loss, that's either by theft or spillage. Somebody leaves personally identifiable information in a Starbucks, that's happened before, or a hacker actually steals it. Disruption, the Fort Lauderdale case, we don't have time to go into a lot of detail on it this afternoon, but in Fort Lauderdale's case a couple of years ago, the hacktivist organization Anonymous actually disrupted Fort Lauderdale systems. They penetrated them, attacked them, because they disagreed with a policy on homelessness. So that was not an attack for monetary gain. That was an attack because of a policy disagreement. And they severely disrupted Fort Lauderdale systems as a result of that. There's obviously disruption, and as Daniela suggested, we're going to see lots more disinformation and deception. There are things called deep fakes. If you haven't heard about them, I would encourage you to read about them, because through artificial intelligence, somebody can mock or mirror me and put any words they want in my mouth. Now, of course, I don't matter, but if you happen to be a presidential candidate or a senator or a senior public official, it does matter what people think you're saying. The same thing with spoofing cell phone numbers. I just a couple of months ago received what I thought was a text from the Hillsborough County Administrator and was about to respond to it when he called me on a separate line on my landline and said, ignore those, somebody is spoofing, somebody has captured my cell phone number and is spoofing people into responding to text messages. So the definition of phishing and of cybersecurity and of breaches is expanding every day. We all know about the case in Pensacola, I hope. There was a terrorist attack, actually a shooting at the naval base, and somebody, we don't know whether they were actually associated with the terrorists or not, somebody took that opportunity to attack the city of Pensacola and disrupt things. Collier County, a business email. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of those in a second, but in one of our neighboring Collier counties in the state of Florida was actually disrupted by a fake business email. In Volusia County, they came in through the library. And in Riviera Beach, again, I'm going to provide you more details on that, but think about all of the various ways they can get at you. And if you can, no matter what you can think of, there's probably a city or county in Florida that has been a victim of that. So welcome to the bullseye. Think about something that Daniela said, particularly when it comes to bulk spear phishing attacks. The hackers can send out thousands upon thousands of identical spear phishing attacks. All it takes is one person to click on it, and that's their gateway in. Next slide, please, Kate. So ransomware has become particularly rampant in the state of Florida. The favorite attack vector is through spear phishing. Somebody lets them in, and then the hacker either steals data and holds it for ransom or shuts down systems. I already mentioned Atlanta and that city's ransomware attack. They decided to pay. On the other hand, you have the city of Baltimore that was attacked, and they decided not to pay. It probably ended up costing them more to recover their systems and their data than the ransomware, but think of the psychology of paying a ransom. Pay it once, maybe you get it free and clear, but maybe you've identified yourself as a potential victim for other ransomware attacks. So the psychology of paying ransomware is difficult indeed, and it's become even trickier with cyber insurance. I'll come to that in a minute. But the $7.5 billion figure includes the payment of ransoms, but also the recovery that it requires, the cost of recovery after data has been lost or stolen or systems have been breached. So it is very, very expensive. And it comes at a time when cities and counties in Florida are cash strapped and budget constrained. So just think about the impact these days with COVID-19 affecting tax revenues. Next slide, please, Kate. A couple of case studies that are worth noting here for you. First, our friends in Riviera Beach. In Riviera Beach, a police department employee actually opened up a spear phishing email. It contained malware. Once the hackers got in, they took down Riviera Beach's website. They infected employee emails. They took over over internet protocols so that people couldn't talk. Most importantly, and here's where the ransom comes into play, they shut down the city's 9/11 dispatch center. Think about the havoc that would create. And the city's leaders, as you can see on the slide, were presented with a demand of about $600,000 in Bitcoin. And as Daniela and I were just discussing, Bitcoin is largely untraceable. It's got its own exchange rate. You can go buy and exchange dollars for Bitcoins on the dark web. And in this case, the hackers were smart. They wanted untraceable currency, so they asked that the ransom be paid in Bitcoin. The ransom in this case specifically involved decrypting the software that had shut down the city's 9/11 dispatch center. Think about that for a moment. If a hacker has penetrated and shut down the dispatch center, if they've literally shut down its systems, they've encrypted those systems with a key that only they possess, they'd be happy to sell it back to you. But can you trust them? Can you trust that when they sell you back that decryption key, it's going to work? And can you trust that they haven't sold the encryption key to somebody else? They paid the insurance, they paid their deductible, and they turned it over to their insurance company to negotiate a payment. So many of you are probably thinking, well, that's just the price of that just cost the city the insurance policy deductible. Trust me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Again, I'm going to come back to cyber insurance in a second. But here's where part of that $7.5 billion in ransomware costs comes in. Right after the attack, the city council approved $1 million in new IT spending. The problem, of course, is waiting till after the attack to invest in your IT infrastructure. And our hope is that counties like Alachua have already invested in what they can in order to erect the strongest possible defense in advance. But as I hope has become clear to you, even the strongest defense can be penetrated. Next slide, please. Here's the city of Ocala. This one is a really interesting one because while a couple of you have said, can't our IT department catch malware embedded in an attachment? And there are technically ways to do that. In the case of Ocala, the scammer posed as a real contractor, an actual city contractor, and sent a spear phishing email to the city's accounts payable and accounts receivable department saying, hey, guess what? I've got a new electronic funds transfer number. So when you send us payment for services rendered, just send it to this account. The hacker didn't need to do anything else but that. When the real construction company billed the city for $740,000, the city sent the payment to that fake bank account. Now, in this case, the bank recovered most of the money. It was hard cash, not Bitcoin, so they were able to do that, and the insurance covered the difference. the city of Ocala only paid the $5,000 deductible. Here's what's so insidious about cyber insurance. We become desensitized. We become inoculated to the cost of a cyber breach. If we know that the insurance will cover it, then it becomes less important to us. Trust me, I know the insurance carrier in the Ocala case. It's the same insurance carrier that covers many cities and counties. The insurance policy is a general liability policy, and it's not going to be long before cyber breach insurance is going to cost cities and counties a whole lot more. So don't think about this as just the price of the cost of the deductible. Think about this as a preventable breach. In this case, somebody in the accounting department clicked on the wrong email. As Daniela said, here was I don't know if you call this, Daniela, somebody in a position of authority, but certainly it was a legitimate contractor, but somebody posing as that real legitimate contractor. And then they're in. Next slide, please. In case you remain unconvinced, here are some more case studies. These are all within the last couple of years, all in the state of Florida. In Tallahassee, this one is particularly problematic for me because in March of 2019, I conducted a cybersecurity for local government symposium, a day-long symposium for about 100 officials in the Tallahassee area, and the mayor attended. And he had a number of his IT department attending as well. But a month later, somebody got in through their HR system. They diverted payroll. Think about your payroll check. They diverted payroll to the tune of they diverted payroll and ransomed that payroll for $500,000. In the case of Key Biscayne and Stewart, spear phishing attack introduced something called the Ryuk virus into the city's systems, and the hackers charged the ransom to decrypt the virus, to turn it off. Again, can you trust them to do that? In this case, apparently they were. There was honor amongst thieves, and they were trustworthy because once the ransom was paid, the systems were turned on. In the case of North Miami Beach and St. Lucie County, in both of those cases, police departments were hacked. Again, a police department employee clicked on a spear phishing attack, the wrong kind of email, the wrong kind of attachment, and they're in, and they shut down dispatch systems, 911 systems, other systems vital to public safety. And the city and the county basically had no choice but to pay ransomware. Again, their insurance covered it, but that's not the point. The point is that somebody had to pay. You can see these other examples. I won't bore you with them in part in the interest of time. I will tell you, though, that in the case of Naples, that was another fake contractor and a fake bank account. In this case, it cost the city $700,000. And actually, it ended up costing them twice that, because they paid $700,000 to the fake contractor, and the real contractor also demanded payment. Again, that goes into that $7.5 billion figure I shared with you. And then finally, in Lake City, data theft. Again, spear phishing attack, let them in the system. Hackers stole data, they stole files, no backups, and the hackers returned the files for the mere price of $480,000. So you can see how daunting these kinds of breaches can be. Next slide, please, Kate. So there are things that you can do, and part of it has to do with creating a cyber secure culture. The culture of any organization has to do with people, process, and technology. I don't care whether you're a city, a county, private sector organization, or the federal government. Those three factors together comprise an organization's culture. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the people side of creating a cyber secure culture. Next slide. So it's in part about training. Today's event is one example of that training. Hopefully you'll retain a lot of this. We're going to give you some, Danielle gave you some takeaways, and I'm going to give you some more here in a minute. But there are other elements to this. For example, if you see something, say something, particularly if you see somebody practicing poor cyber hygiene practices. What are poor cyber hygiene practices? Plugging in strange devices into your computer, using passwords that aren't strong. You all know what the most widely used password is password 123. Not very hard for a hacker to crack that password. The easiest way to find passwords, try this one evening after everybody's gone home. Walk through a work area when COVID-19 has run its course. Walk through a work area and lift up people's keyboards. And most of those keyboards will have a yellow sticky underneath with somebody's password on it. So if you're disguising yourself as a member of a cleaning crew, suddenly you've got somebody's credentials and you're in. Those are good, those are poor cyber hygiene practices. We want you to practice good ones, but if you see somebody doing something wrong, you should not be afraid to say something. I always tell city managers and county administrators, make cybersecurity a budget item. Not in part because putting money to this is important, but also because if it's a budget item, it signals that it is important to frontline employees like yourselves. Obviously, ongoing training is important, as well as testing. In this case, the testing that I mentioned at the outset, a mock spear phishing attack that, frankly and unfortunately, most people failed. Hopefully, the next time Alachua County tests you, you'll all get A's. Next slide, please. So here's the recap. And if you've got questions, get them ready. First, this is common sense, folks. If it's too good to be true, it probably isn't. Think about those people who got that email from Kanye West who said, hey, Ron, good to meet you, good to know you. Send me $1,000, I'll send you 2,000 back. I hope everyone realizes that's too good to be true. I hope none of you sent money in. Now, you're probably going to see things that are more sophisticated than that, but just be a bit cynical, a bit suspicious, always vigilant, because if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't. Be on the lookout. Many spear phishing attacks, unfortunately too many, are written by people overseas who don't know how to speak English. And so there are typos and grammatical errors. That used to be pretty prevalent. You used to get an email from Amazon saying you won a prize, or Verizon saying here's a free iPhone, but it contained typographical errors or grammatical errors, and it was pretty easy to detect, and I hope you all deleted it. Those are becoming much more rare as people get more, as hackers, spear phishers, get more sophisticated. Also be on the lookout for organizational errors. If somebody from the HR department says, send me your PII to verify something, look at the office symbol. Look at the timing of it. Verify it. Trust but verify. If it were me, I would be suspicious of any email that asked me to give any personally identifiable information, whether it's my own or someone else's. Just be suspicious of it. Verify the source and the origin. If you all have a suspected spear phishing email, try this. Click on that email so you can see its originating address. If it's an address that you don't recognize, if it has nothing to do with the alleged organization emailing you, if it's a bunch of numbers and letters and gobbledygook, chances are it's a spear phishing attack. Do not click on it. Verify the source. And when in doubt, don't open it. That's especially problematic for Florida public employees with public records laws. because your natural inclination, we want to do good by our citizens, your natural inclination is to click on it. Many cities and counties, and I apologize for not knowing whether Alachua County can do this, but there are ways to screen attachments to detect, in most cases, to be able to detect malware. But in case you don't, ask somebody to include that attachment's text in the body of the email. So you're not clicking on an unknown email that may contain things that you don't want in your system. It's easier to screen emails than it is attachments. So if people make public records requests in the body of an email, it can be screened. It is harder if it's an attachment. But these are simple, common sense rules. They all represent good cyber hygiene practices. And if you just observe them, chances are you're going to get an A on that next mock, hopefully mock, spear phishing attack test. So let me stop there, see if there are any questions. We've only got a few more minutes left, and I noticed that Professor Oliveira has left us. So any questions from anyone in the audience? Kate?
I believe that we've addressed all the questions that were asked. So good on us.
Okay, well, I hope we've scared you straight, and I'm going to make you suffer through the paid advertisement part of this. We are from Cyber Florida. Cyber Florida, in this case, partnered with the University of Florida because Alachua County is in Gainesville's backyard. And one of the things that we have tried to do across the state, even though Cyber Florida has a statewide mandate, is to partner with institutions that are more local in nature, like University of Florida in Gainesville, or USF in Tampa, or Florida International in Miami, to put on symposia like this, to teach public employees and private sector employees good cyber hygiene practices, particularly around spear phishing, because that's the most obvious and most widely used attack vector. Cyber Florida was created in 2013 with that statewide mandate. We are located at the University of Florida, South Florida in Tampa, but our job is to herd the cats, to integrate all of the cybersecurity research, education, and community engagement efforts of Florida's 12 state university system institutions. That's why we are sharing today's program with the University of Florida. And I won't bore you with all of the other initiatives except to say that our website is at the bottom of this slide. I would encourage you to visit it because we're doing all kinds of really cool cybersecurity things with elementary, middle, and high school students and their teachers, with college students, with colleges and universities. And we're even doing a lot of work now on election security and other key areas like that. So again, thank you so much for your attention today. Kate, if you have any closing remarks, now's the time, and then we'll sign off and give people a few minutes back in their afternoons.
I would just say, Ron, maybe if we could leave them with one takeaway from today's event, what do you think would be our primary tip for the day?
The primary tip for the day, be vigilant. Don't just instinctively click on an attachment and assume that it's clean and pure. Even if it's from somebody you know, be vigilant, be suspicious, be a little bit cynical, be on the lookout, because we're all on the bullseye, especially public employees in the state of Florida. As you saw with the case studies, there are just too many instances where our colleagues have been victimized, not just themselves individually, but the cities and counties that they work for and the citizens that they serve. So be vigilant. That's the one takeaway I'd leave everyone with. So with that, thanks everybody for your attention. Thanks, Kate. Thanks to Alachua County for hosting this, and good luck, everybody.